There's an invisible dynamic operating in almost every relationship, something men often sense but rarely identify clearly. You feel as if you're being steered, nudged, or controlled in subtle ways, yet when you try to point to the evidence, it slips through your fingers. The unease lingers, the suspicion of manipulation grows, but the exact source of it feels elusive. What most men don't realize is that women use deeply ingrained psychological tactics that function below the level of conscious thought. They are not calculated schemes hatched by cold strategists, but evolutionary programs written into human behavior after millions of years of adaptation. A woman often doesn't even realize she's deploying them. They happen instinctively, like breathing, and they only work on men who are psychologically vulnerable to them. Once you understand how they operate, you begin to see the hidden patterns, and you can finally step outside of their influence. One of the most common mechanisms is withdrawal and emotional distance. Everything seems fine one day, conversations flow, her attention is warm, and the energy between you feels steady. Then, without warning, she pulls away. She becomes quiet, short in her replies, preoccupied, and emotionally unavailable. No explanation, no context, just distance. Your mind immediately begins racing to solve the puzzle. Did you say something wrong? Did you forget an important detail? Upset her without realizing it? Or fail to meet some unspoken expectation? The panic builds as you replay recent interactions, scanning for the mistake you must have made. That confusion and anxiety drive you to chase harder, apologize for things you can't identify, and reshape your behavior in the hope of fixing something you don't even understand. The reality is that her withdrawal isn't punishment. It's an unconscious test. Her biology is measuring how desperate you are for her attention, how easily your emotions can be destabilized, and how dependent you are on her approval. The more you pursue during her withdrawal, the more you signal that your psychological state rests entirely on her presence. When she eventually returns with warmth again, the scarcity she created makes her attention feel like a reward, cementing her influence even deeper. This is not intentional cruelty, but a reflexive evolutionary tactic designed to keep you focused on her and to ensure you never become too secure in your position. Another powerful but often invisible mechanism is mirroring and false compatibility. At the start of a relationship, everything feels almost magically aligned. She seems to love the same music, enjoy the same hobbies, and share your values and dreams. You feel as though you've discovered someone who understands you in a way no one else ever has. That perfect compatibility doesn't happen by chance. It is her unconscious programming at work. She observes what you respond to, identifies your emotional needs, and mirrors them back to you, shaping herself into your ideal partner during the fragile bonding period. This is not lying in the traditional sense, it's adaptation. Her biology wants to secure attachment, and presenting herself as your perfect match is the fastest way to achieve that. Once she feels confident that your commitment is secured, her authentic self begins to emerge. Suddenly those hobbies no longer interest her, those values aren't fully shared, and her priorities begin shifting. What changed is not her affection, but the mask. The compatibility was a temporary biological performance meant to draw you in and lock down your investment. What you fell for wasn't a deception so much as a survival strategy, one that has existed for thousands of years in human courtship. A third pattern that subtly shapes men's behavior is guilt deployment and responsibility transfer. When she expresses disappointment, sadness, or frustration, it often comes in a form that implies you are the cause of her distress. Even if her mood is unrelated to you, the weight of responsibility somehow lands on your shoulders. You are wired to believe that part of your role as a man is to keep her happy, safe, and emotionally stable, and she unconsciously exploits that programming. You rush to fix things, to adjust your behavior, to smooth over the discomfort, because you fear being the reason behind her unhappiness. She doesn't need to demand directly. By expressing emotion in ways that connect implicitly to your actions, she activates your instinctive protective drive, turning it into a tool that reshapes your choices. This tactic is particularly effective because it turns your best intentions against you. Your desire to be a good partner, to take care of her, becomes the very mechanism by which she gains influence. Over time, this creates a pattern of guilt-based conditioning. You find yourself apologizing even when your instincts told you the issue wasn't your fault. You begin doubting your own judgment, second-guessing your perceptions, and eventually allowing her emotions to override your reality. The cost isn't just small compromises, it's a gradual erosion of your confidence in your own perspective. Then there are the hot and cold emotional cycles. One moment she is warm, affectionate, and entirely present. Her attention is intense and consuming, making you feel seen, valued, and secure. You relax into it, convinced that the connection is stable. But then it shifts. The warmth disappears and is replaced with distance, distraction, and cold replies. "I'm fine. "I'm busy, nothing's wrong." Short, closed statements that leave you confused and anxious. Without realizing it, you've been caught in a cycle of intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological principle that makes gambling so addictive. The unpredictability is what hooks you. You never know when the warmth will return, and that uncertainty makes her affection far more powerful than if it were steady. You start working harder, sending more messages, buying gifts, doing anything to bring back the emotional high she gave you before. The cycle ensures that you remain constantly invested, because the hope of the next wave of warmth keeps you chasing. What you interpret as instability is actually an unconscious biological strategy. By alternating between availability and distance, she ensures you never disengage, never stop working for her attention, and never feel fully secure. That insecurity is what keeps you hooked. These patterns don't function as deliberate cruelty. They are instinctive programs that have been refined over centuries to measure male strength and stability. But for the man on the receiving end, they can feel like invisible chains pulling tighter with each cycle. The key isn't to blame her for running the program. It's to recognize it for what it is and to see how easily your mind can be pulled into its gravity when you don't understand the mechanism at play. Another deeply ingrained tactic is suggestion and indirect influence. Instead of making direct requests that might trigger resistance, she weaves her desires into casual remarks and seemingly innocent stories. She might mention a dress she saw online and thought was beautiful. She might tell you about a friend whose boyfriend surprised her with flowers or a romantic trip. She might offhandedly remark that she has never experienced a certain kind of gesture. None of these statements are framed as demands, yet each one plants a seed in your mind. You begin thinking about those actions, imagining her delight if you performed them, and eventually you convince yourself that the idea was yours all along. This subtlety makes the influence more powerful than a direct request could ever be, because you experience it as voluntary. The truth is that her communication style exploits a fundamental difference between men and women. Men typically express what they want in direct terms, while women often communicate through hints and implication. When she influences you through suggestion, she bypasses resistance entirely, allowing you to adopt her desires as if they originated within you. The result is that you feel like a thoughtful partner, when in reality you've been guided down a path without realizing it. The love bombing pattern is another mechanism that shapes the trajectory of relationships. At the beginning, she showers you with overwhelming attention, affection, and validation. Every message feels like a spark, every interaction like an affirmation that you've found something rare. Compliments are constant, connection feels electric. She says she doesn't usually fall this fast, that there's something different about you, that fate must have brought you together. In just a matter of days, she escalates from curiosity to declarations of deep emotional connection. You find yourself swept up in the intensity, believing you've discovered a love unlike any you've known. The irony is that this isn't calculated deception. It's biology flooding her brain with chemicals designed to forge attachment quickly. Her feelings are real in the moment, but they are amplified by evolutionary programming that pushes her to secure commitment fast. When the chemical surge subsides, the intensity drops and normal dynamics set in. But now you're left chasing the high of those first weeks, convinced something has gone wrong because it no longer feels the same. That desperation to recreate the early fire gives her tremendous leverage. She doesn't need to maintain the same level of effort because you're already hooked, always striving to bring back the intensity that once consumed you. The memory of the beginning becomes a powerful anchor that binds you to her even when later behavior doesn't match the same devotion. Beyond these primary mechanisms are countless smaller but equally corrosive tactics that seep into the cracks of daily life. The guilt trip is one of the most common. She might agree to your suggestion in the moment, only to later express disappointment that it wasn't truly what she wanted. You're left feeling guilty for not reading her mind, while she positions herself as the accommodating partner who went along with your choice. Sarcasm disguised as humor functions similarly. A comment framed as a joke undermines your confidence or pokes at an insecurity, and if you react, she accuses you of being too sensitive. The damage is done, but her plausible deniability shields her from accountability. Silent treatment operates with the same logic. Instead of directly stating what's wrong, she withdraws communication, ignores messages, or avoids physical closeness. You are left scrambling to repair the rift without knowing what caused it, training yourself to anticipate her unspoken needs to avoid future withdrawal. Even intimacy itself can be withheld strategically. She may suddenly be too tired, too busy, or uninterested, but only after something didn't go her way. The timing is no coincidence, it's unconscious punishment, making you associate disappointment with loss of connection. Then there's the tactic of making everything your fault. If she's sad, you must have failed to support her. If she's angry, you must have provoked her. If something external frustrates her, it's still somehow linked to your inability to fix it. This tactic transfers the burden of emotional regulation entirely onto your shoulders. Instead of owning her moods and managing her own reactions, she makes you responsible for maintaining her equilibrium. The deeper consequence is that you begin to feel like you're always walking on eggshells, constantly adjusting to keep her stable. Over time, this erodes your sense of independence and traps you in a cycle where your emotional state is enslaved to hers. Alongside this sits the refusal to ever admit fault. No matter the subject, politics, household routines, or trivial disagreements, she positions herself as always right. The refusal to acknowledge mistakes, even in minor matters, creates a dynamic where you are always on the defensive, always wrong by default. This isn't just about winning arguments, it's about cementing a structure of dominance in which she retains the authority to define what's correct. Technology has made all of these tactics more potent than ever. Social media provides a stage for carefully curated posts designed to spark jealousy, demonstrate value, or signal withdrawal. Dating apps provide an endless stream of backup attention that reinforces her sense of abundance. Messaging platforms allow her to create hot and cold cycles with nothing more than response timing and tone. A left-on-read message can feel like withdrawal. A carefully worded post about an amazing experience with friends can serve as a suggestion. A photo with another man can ignite jealousy that keeps you on edge. The ancient biological programming now has tools that magnify its effects, spreading manipulation through digital channels with precision and frequency unimaginable in the past. What once required face-to-face interaction can now be achieved with a simple notification, leaving you perpetually reactive to her digital presence. The crucial truth is that none of this operates at the level of conscious strategy. Women don't sit down and plan to manipulate men like chess pieces. These are unconscious programs running automatically, inherited from evolutionary pressures that prioritize survival and reproduction. Just as men are wired to feel attraction toward youth and fertility without conscious choice, women are wired to use these influence tactics without deliberate intent. They are not personal attacks. They are automated tests, probing your psychology to measure your strength, your boundaries, and your ability to withstand emotional pressure. This is why reasoning with these behaviors rarely works. You can't negotiate with programming. You can't logic someone out of instincts that operate below their awareness. Trying to convince her to stop often just makes the behavior more sophisticated, because once she's conscious of it, she can disguise it more effectively. The only real solution is not to change her behavior, but to build immunity within yourself. When withdrawal doesn't destabilize you, it loses its function. When guilt trips fail to extract the response she expects, the pattern fades. When hot and cold cycles no longer trigger addiction, her biology stops deploying them as management tools. The program adapts to reality, and if reality shows these tactics don't work on you, her unconscious mind gradually abandons them. But achieving that immunity requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires developing psychological resilience, so strong that external emotional pressure can't dictate your actions. Immunity begins with building a life so grounded in purpose that emotional turbulence feels like background noise. When you are consumed by a mission larger than yourself, the ups and downs of her moods lose their power. A man without purpose is easy to sway, because her approval becomes his primary source of meaning. A man with purpose sees her affection as a complement, not the foundation of his identity. This shift changes everything. If withdrawal doesn't send you into panic, she loses the leverage it once gave her. If guilt doesn't shape your decisions, the program has no reason to run. The hot and cold cycles dissolve when your emotional state no longer depends on intermittent doses of her validation. The solution isn't about making her stop. It's about training yourself to become unshakable, the type of man whose frame cannot be bent by emotional pressure. When she sees that manipulation fails, her unconscious programming adapts. Either she escalates, exposing herself as someone addicted to control, or she begins to relate to you in healthier ways because your strength forces her to abandon ineffective tactics. Escalation is the natural response when tactics fail. If subtle withdrawal doesn't trigger pursuit, she may extend the silence, disappearing for days. If gentle guilt doesn't yield results, she may create emotional scenes with tears and drama. If the hot and cold pattern loses its grip, she may swing between extremes of love and rejection. These escalations are not conscious strategy. They are the panic response of a system that has relied on these tools all its life, suddenly finding them ineffective. Her biology interprets your immunity as malfunction, prompting it to try stronger measures in an attempt to restore influence. This is why you often see women become more dramatic or volatile once they realize their usual patterns don't work on a particular man. They aren't plotting in a calculated way. They are reacting to a loss of control their biology interprets as dangerous. Understanding this helps you remain calm rather than personalizing the escalation. She's not choosing to become manipulative. She's experiencing an internal alarm system, scrambling for stability. This distinction reveals character in ways nothing else can. The woman who doubles down on manipulation when it fails shows that her priority is control rather than connection. She is unwilling or unable to rise above her instincts, making her unsuitable for any partnership built on respect. The woman who recognizes that her tactics are ineffective and adapts by developing authentic communication shows the opposite. She reveals that she values the relationship enough to override programming and engage from a healthier place. This is how immunity becomes a filter. By refusing to bend under manipulation, you expose whether she's capable of growing beyond unconscious instincts or whether she's enslaved to them indefinitely. What begins as resistance to manipulation becomes a tool for revealing her true capacity for partnership. Every tactic is essentially a test. Withdrawal tests your emotional independence. Guilt tests your sense of responsibility. Hot and cold cycles test your stability under uncertainty. Suggestion tests how easily your desires can be redirected. Love bombing tests how quickly you become dependent on external validation. Each one provides her unconscious mind with data about your psychological strength. It's an ongoing evaluation system, constantly measuring whether you are strong enough to lead, protect, and provide stability. From this perspective, what feels like manipulation is actually biology running diagnostics. The cruel irony is that these tests often destroy the very relationships they are meant to optimize. A man who fails them becomes increasingly submissive, eroding her respect. A man who passes them without compassion risks appearing cold or detached. The balance lies in being immune without becoming indifferent, strong without being callous, and self-sufficient without losing the ability to connect. The consequences of failing these tests reach beyond the relationship itself. A man who repeatedly caves to manipulation begins developing what could be called accommodation addiction. He becomes conditioned to avoid conflict at all costs, reshaping his behavior to keep others happy, even when it undermines his own needs. What begins with his girlfriend spills into every area of life. He becomes the employee who can't assert boundaries with his boss, the friend who can't say no, the man who allows his family to dictate his decisions. His inability to resist manipulation in one sphere of life spreads into all others, leaving him perpetually controlled by external forces. The erosion of his self-respect becomes systemic, shaping every interaction until he no longer remembers what it feels like to stand firm. The reverse is also true. A man who trains himself to withstand unconscious female tactics becomes resistant to manipulation everywhere. He no longer crumbles when faced with guilt trips from colleagues, pressure from bosses, or emotional leverage from friends. The strength he builds in one context becomes armor in all contexts. This is why developing immunity is not just about relationships, it is about reclaiming sovereignty over your entire life. A man who cannot be manipulated is a man who cannot be enslaved by anyone's expectations. He becomes capable of leading not only himself but others, because his stability radiates outward, providing certainty in uncertain environments. The parallels with other domains are striking. In the military, recruits are deliberately placed under extreme stress not to break them, but to reveal who can remain functional under pressure. The soldier who crumbles in training would never be trusted in combat. Women, whether they know it or not, apply the same principle to relationships. They push, pull, withdraw, and overwhelm to see if you can remain centered when conditions become difficult. They don't want men who need perfect circumstances to function. They want men who become better leaders when challenges intensify. Similarly, in science, a new drug is exposed to increasingly harsh tests to determine if it can perform reliably under strain. If it breaks down under pressure, it is rejected as ineffective. Women's unconscious testing serves the same purpose, to determine whether you are reliable under emotional strain. In both cases, the purpose of the test is survival. Only those who can withstand pressure without collapsing are trusted to carry responsibility. What many men misunderstand is that inconsistency destroys them more than outright weakness. If you sometimes resist manipulation, but other times cave, you create uncertainty in her unconscious mind. She never knows whether her tactics will work, which makes her test more frequently and with greater intensity. This intermittent reinforcement is the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. The unpredictability keeps her invested in the testing process. The solution is consistency. When you demonstrate without exception that manipulation fails, the testing eventually stops because the results are predictable. You don't just win isolated battles, you end the war. Her unconscious programming recognizes that these tools no longer serve their purpose, and she redirects her energy elsewhere. The dynamic transforms because you've removed the fuel that kept it alive. The long-term consequences of these dynamics reveal why so many modern relationships collapse under pressure. Women rely on unconscious tactics to secure commitment, yet the very men who succumb to them lose the qualities that made them attractive in the first place. Their constant accommodation drains their confidence, their independence fades, and their leadership evaporates. She begins to sense that the man she wanted is slipping away, replaced by someone weaker, more compliant, and less magnetic. Respect erodes silently until the attraction that once seemed unshakable dissolves into frustration and contempt. He, in turn, loses respect for himself, because he recognizes on some level that his behavior is no longer guided by principle but by fear of losing her. What began as unconscious testing evolves into a destructive loop where both partners feel trapped yet unsatisfied. The paradox is that the less these tactics work on you, the stronger the relationship can become. When you are immune, you stop feeding the very behaviors that erode respect. Instead of chasing after withdrawal, you remain steady, and she learns that your attention isn't something she can manipulate, it's something you choose to give freely. Instead of reshaping yourself under guilt, you hold your ground, teaching her that accountability is mutual. Instead of becoming addicted to hot and cold cycles, you detach from the roller coaster, showing her that your stability is not dependent on her mood swings. This forces her into a new mode of relating. Either she escalates, revealing herself as someone who cannot transcend her programming, or she grows, discovering healthier ways of connecting. In either case, your immunity becomes the filter that separates those who are capable of real partnership from those who are not. The testing itself is not malicious, it is functional. Every tactic doubles as both a method of influence and an evaluation system. Withdrawal measures whether you can remain composed without her attention. Guilt measures whether you accept responsibility for things that are not yours to carry. Emotional cycles measure your endurance under uncertainty. Suggestion measures how easily your desires can be redirected. Love bombing measures how quickly you lose yourself in external validation. Each tactic provides her unconscious biology with data that determines respect levels, attraction, and long-term viability. From her perspective, this process ensures she aligns with a partner strong enough to withstand the storms of life. From your perspective, it often feels like sabotage. The truth is that both are accurate. It is at once testing and manipulation, unconscious evaluation, and unconscious control. Only by recognizing the dual nature of these dynamics can you respond effectively. To pass these tests is not to crush her or dominate her. It is to remain immovable in your frame, to show that you cannot be bent by invisible forces. This requires killing the part of you that craves validation above all else. The man who needs approval is always at risk of manipulation, because the withdrawal of approval becomes a weapon. The man who generates his own sense of worth cannot be coerced, because no external source can supply or remove his identity. This is psychological sovereignty. When you reach this point, you are not cold or detached, you are free. You can love without being controlled, you can give without being drained, you can connect without dissolving into dependency. This is the state from which authentic relationships emerge, because only when you no longer need control over the other person, and no longer allow them to control, you can connection exist without distortion. What makes this so difficult is that her programming is persistent. If you show weakness even once, you reset the cycle. Inconsistency invites further testing, because uncertainty fuels repetition. The solution is relentless stability. When she realizes with certainty that no tactic will bend you, she stops using them, because biology no longer finds them useful. The drama that once consumed your connection fades, replaced by genuine partnership if she adapts, or complete exposure if she cannot. Either way, you win, because you are no longer enslaved by invisible chains. You've transformed the relationship from an unconscious battlefield into a conscious choice. She remains by your side, not because she can control you, but because she respects you. Or she leaves, revealing that her primary desire was power rather than partnership. In both outcomes, you preserve your sovereignty and your self-respect. The tragedy is that many men never reach this point. They spend their lives bending under manipulation, chasing after validation that never satisfies, reshaping themselves in endless cycles of guilt and fear. Their relationships collapse, not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much in the wrong way. They thought love meant surrender. They thought commitment meant compliance. They thought leadership meant keeping the peace at any cost. In reality, true leadership requires the opposite. It requires the courage to hold your ground, the strength to resist emotional pressure, and the clarity to know that love built on control is not love at all. It requires the recognition that her unconscious tactics are not attacks to fear, but tests to pass, opportunities to demonstrate strength rather than insecurity. When you approach them this way, the dynamic shifts permanently. The ultimate irony is that the tests meant to ensure her security often destroy the very relationships they were designed to preserve. By leaning on manipulation, she risks eroding the respect and connection that could have kept the bond alive. By succumbing to manipulation, you risk eroding the strength and independence that made her attracted in the first place. The only way out of this cycle is immunity. You cannot negotiate with instincts. You cannot reason with biology. You can only develop yourself into a man who is untouchable by unconscious influence. When you reach that state, your choices become free. You can walk away from destructive dynamics without fear. You can stay in healthy ones without losing yourself. You stop living as a man defined by how others treat you and begin living as a man defined by your own frame. At that point, the tactics no longer matter. They may continue in the background, but they bounce off you like arrows against armor. She can withdraw, but you remain calm. She can guilt, but you refuse the burden. She can love bomb, but you keep perspective. She can turn cold, but you stay warm without chasing. Every attempt to destabilize you only highlights your strength. And in that strength lies the truth. Manipulation only works on those who need what can be withheld. The man who no longer needs approval cannot be controlled. The man who no longer fears withdrawal cannot be manipulated. The man who no longer chases validation is the man she truly respects. The choice, as always, is yours. Remain a prisoner of unconscious programming or rise above it. Pass the tests, build immunity, and step into the freedom that comes when manipulation loses its power forever.